Land Rover on the hoist. Let's look at the handbrake for the Land Rover. This is the transfer case. This is where the drive comes, engine through the gearbox, transfer case, centre diff, and then gets split front and rear axles. And the handbrake on the Land Rover is this brake drum, which tend to leak, but they're okay. It's not a bad sized brake drum. There's only one of them, like a normal handbrake is on the rear wheels, aren't they? So there's two of them. The advantage of this though is it's going through the diff, and the diff is 3.5 to 1 ratio. You know, it's basically a 3.5 to 1 torque increaser, same as a gearbox. That's all a gearbox is, a torque multiplier. The stopping or the force on this handbrake, so there's only one of them, but it's times by 3.5. So why can't I still have this when I put the Tesla drive unit in there? Is because this is all coming out. Basically the Tesla drive unit is going to sit exactly here, and instead of this centre diff, it's going to be the Tesla's diff going out. And there's not enough room to mount this drum. It would be a bit of a manufacturing thing to be able to do it. But you can see here, this is basically where that drum is sitting. There's not enough room around here anyway. So, I mean, you could try to mount it back here, but then it would come down here and it would reduce your clearance, and there's some engineering behind that as well. As I'm finding, a lot of these things that I'm doing, there's multiple ways to do them. I went down the route of getting some aftermarket Willwood handbrake kits. With not too much modification and engineering, I managed to fit these to the rear discs of the Land Rover. An added complexity of doing it this way is that I also have to emulate the Tesla brake units, because the car will not be happy if it doesn't know that the handbrake's either on or off. So I also spent time working all this out. I went through a process of trying to simulate this current feedback process using big resistors and Arduino and relays for timing. This was sort of successful. I managed to pretty much emulate it. But the main problem I was finding after testing these mechanical rear handbrakes were that they just weren't effective enough. It works, but to be honest, for me, it doesn't work well enough. There's not enough clamping force in this. If it's adjusted perfectly, it's just adequate, but you have to remember, the handbrake's more important with the electric drive unit than with the gearbox engine, because if you just put this in first gear, leave it in gear, remember that's a torque multiplier in first gear, and the engine compression will, hold it as well. But electric motor will just free spin, and there's no parking pole in the Tesla. So the handbrake is the only thing that's going to hold the car. So it needs to be good. I'm not going to do it this way, even though I've done it all. So let's have a look at how the Tesla does it. Mando. Good TV series. Anyway, these are the Tesla rear brake calipers. They're Mando brand. They're not just the rear brake calipers, as you can see. They've got this weird black mechanism here, which is the park brake. It is literally just a DC motor in there. I haven't taken it apart, I'm just assuming. DC motor, and I guess some reduction gears to give it a bit more torque, with a worm drive through to open and close the pads, depending on the polarity on the pins there. It's actually fairly simple. Usually electronic or electric park brakes that I've seen, they're a separate unit to the rear brake caliper. So these included all in one thing, which is pretty cool. So if I want to use these, I'm going to have to mount the whole caliper on the Land Rover, and I may as well replace the current rear brake caliper and brake pads with this whole thing rather than having two whole calipers. Got so many lizards in here. There's a lizard living in here somewhere. Anyway, the good thing about electronic park brakes, through a DC motor and reduction gears, and might even be a worm gear, I'm not 100% sure, but it reduces the it's a torque multiplier, geared torque multiplier, whether that's through gears or a worm gear, doesn't matter. But the torque multiplier makes sure that these brakes are clamped on really hard, more so than I can do with that cable operated wheelwood parking mechanism. So these will be a lot more effective, and I need a good, as I mentioned, I need a good effective brake, because this is the one thing that's going to hold the car. So the Land Rover is going to have some Mandos on it. Right, so I'm just doing a few little tests, quick mock-ups of, this is the Tesla Model 3 caliper. Wanted to make sure it cleared the Land Rover wheel, obviously, so I've done all that, and yep, there's enough room, plenty of room between that and the rim. So I'm going to have to put a spacer here, space it out, and then another plate to come up and grab it here. That'll work alright. So the Tesla caliper is mounted. So I've got 20mm plus 10mm spacer in there, so 30mm, and then a 10mm thing here, although I'm going to double it to make it 20mm. And it clears the wheel no problem. So yeah, it's good, and it's sitting about where I want it to. The problem is, that's the spring. So the spring's going to foul on this, the handbrake actuator. You can see it's definitely not going to work if I put it there. That's sort of where the spring sits. Not going to work. Problem though, I just need to rotate it around. Right, well that was easier than I thought. Just moved it around to the next holes around there. It clears, I had to cut a little bit there, not much, to clear the shock bottom mount, or the damper bottom mount, should I say. So yeah, obviously it clears the spring easily now. Now, I guess the only disadvantage is, does it hang too low? I think it's okay, so the damper mount goes here. I think that's alright actually. I'm just going to have a look on the car. I think it's better than the handbrake caliper I've got there anyway, that I've had there for a while and hasn't been pulled off. The other disadvantage of this aftermarket handbrake is this bit here hangs low. I mean, it's right at the wheel, so when you're going over things, theoretically your wheels will be up, but I think it'll be good. The actual pads are sitting in a really good spot, right on the edge. They're right on the edge of the, pretty much flush with the end of the rotor, so that's good. And I've got just enough clearance there. I haven't got much more to play with, as you can see, but that's fine, that's plenty. As far as closeness to the disc, that's as good as it's going to get. 6.5mm, 5mm, so there's a little bit of difference. The whole idea of this design is this floats, so it'll adjust accordingly, so it doesn't have to be perfect. But another thing, the Land Rover rotor is 14mm, the Tesla rotor is 20mm, so there's 6mm difference. So I just put a 3mm spacer behind each pad, that should solve that problem. Mainly just so that the piston doesn't come out too far. I mean, it would probably be okay, but I'd rather just keep it the same specs as it was designed for. Made up some spacers. These are 6mm steel, which will sit basically in there against the piston. And then yeah, these sit like here, to space the pads in 6mm, which is the difference between the thickness of the Tesla rotors and the Land Rover rotors. Initially I put 3mm on each side, so thinner ones, but this was fouling on the wheel, then the inner part of the Land Rover wheel, i.e. in there, so it needed to come back a little bit more. So I decided just to space this out. So this is fully floating sort of system, so that's fine. And yeah, they have a little nipple here. You can see where the piston comes out and pushes on it. I think this is designed to stop the piston from rotating. So I've had to put a hole in there to take up the old one. And I've got a piece of M5 screw that I've Loctited in there and cut the head off. So that'll serve the same purpose. And yeah, I've had to drill holes to clear these other rivets. This one here is actually just for brake. So there's no brake, electric brake sensor on a Tesla, believe it or not. But they have these little pieces of metal. So obviously when the pad gets almost to the metal here, rather than having the horrible sound of the steel grating along the rotor and totally destroying the rotor, this will start grinding first and will create a horrible noise, and you'll know then that you need to replace your pads if that ever happens in a Tesla, because they'll probably last the life of the car. Here we have the Tesla Model 3 rear calipers hooked up to the Land Rover rotors, clearing the wheels. The electric park brake built in. Yeah, I'm quite happy with that. I want to get some high tensile bolts for these, because these bolts are just very low grade. And then it's, oh yeah, I'll make the shield here. I'll just have to, I might have to, I don't know if I'll have to modify it much. Rotate it around a bit for the new calipers. Anyway, that's easy to do. But quite happy with that. I think that's going to be much better than the mechanical ones I've got on there at the moment. And also too, it means I don't have to emulate the handbrake mechanism anymore, which I've already half done, but I mean, yeah, I think this is definitely the way to go.